I try to keep my expectations realistic. I mean, I'm not the kind of person who wants it all. I just want to know I'll have enough. You know, a nice, happy middle-class life. The American dream, I guess. But if I were to really let myself dream big, I'd have to admit there's a lot in life I'd like to have and experience. I mean, if I could blink and have anything I wanted, my list would make me sound pretty spoiled. You see, I want to be perfectly happy and healthy. I'd want to be surrounded by love and good times. I'd want to have enough money for nice things. I really like nice things. I would eat and drink the best this world offers, travel extensively. I'd live lavishly in the world's most exotic places. While I'm dreaming here, I'd be very attractive, intelligent, talented, successful, rich. I'd be liked. I'd be loved. I'd be popular. Maybe I'd even be famous. While I'm dreaming here, I would do every big adventure, from bungee jumping to climbing Mount Everest, always completely assured of being successful and injury-free, of course. Who am I kidding? I guess I really am one of those people. I want to have it all and do it all and be it all. And I want it to work out great with no pain and no loss. If I'm completely honest, I want all of my needs and wants met immediately and abundantly, all the time. All the time. But I'll settle for that nice, happy middle-class life. I'll adjust my expectations. Be more realistic. Right?
The words you just heard in the monologue, the things depicted, they are an absolute accurate depiction of you. Now, some of you are right away. You don't know me. I don't think that way. I've never had those kinds of thoughts go through my head. Let me go further. They're not only an accurate depiction of you, they're an accurate depiction of me, and they're an accurate depiction of every single human being that's ever walked on the planet, more than likely. We may not use those exact words. We may have so long buried some of the feelings that we no longer remember or can't identify with them. But this is the simple truth about human nature. We are creatures of need. Some of our needs are pretty obvious. You know, we need survival stuff. But then we have this whole different layer of needs, and they're very extensive. We sometimes feel guilty. We feel this tension to even mention how much we really want. But the truth is, it doesn't really matter how much we have. The truth is, we want just a little bit more. And I don't want you to feel guilty about that. This isn't what this message is about. In fact, my greatest fear is not that your desires are too big. My greatest fear, frankly, is that your desires are not big enough. Because you see, if you follow your desires, those real desires, those God-implanted desires, and they are extraordinary. You, I, every human, if we thought we could blink our eyes and bring it to pass, We really do want it all. And we want it all now. And we don't want it to ever go away. And if you allow yourself to follow those desires, to let them surface and think them and utter them, you might struggle with a couple feelings. You might feel a little foolish and childish for even thinking such a thing because you know it's not possible. And then you might even feel a little guilty because, you know, we always can look around us and see people that have so much less than us and their life is so much harder than ours. But I think those feelings are really important to surface and to even nurture to a degree, because if you follow them long enough and if you follow them fully enough, in other words, if you let your imagination and your deepest desires just go, the sky the limit, no limit, you will find that there's nothing in this world, nothing that is enough. Just like the song said, it's not enough. It's not enough. It's not enough. And it will lead us, it is meant to lead us to the conclusion that man, that you, that I cannot live without God. There are desires so deep in us, so ingrained in us, so large, that only God and only His kingdom could ever bring fulfillment of these desires. And that's exactly where these desires are meant to lead us. So there's a danger in squelching them. There's a danger in pushing them out of our minds altogether. They are meant to be there. They should be acknowledged because they lead us to the proper place. They lead us back to the conclusion that we must have God and we must have His intervention, or we are sad creatures that will never really be satisfied. We'll just settle. You can only go around once in life, you know. Life is what it is. Have it a little bit better than a lot of people. Be satisfied with that, and that's all there is. So we live with this tension, these desires that are part of our humanity, and then almost a guilt for allowing them to surface, for feeling like we should be grateful for what we have. Now, there's a balance to this, but I want us to kind of start on this search, first of all, of allowing ourselves to understand and believe that it's normal, it's human, it's not being spoiled, it's not being evil and selfish and greedy to have these desires. They are written in our spiritual DNA by God. We're not the first, we won't be the last to have them. The question is how do we manage them so that this ache for satisfaction doesn't become an unquenchable torment that cripples us from the kind of life that God intends us to live out in these few days we have under the sun. Let me share the thoughts of a man. His name was King Solomon. He was the third, perhaps considered one of the greatest kings of Israel, the son of King David. And he was a guy that had the luxury of time, and he had the luxury of power and money. He was the wealthiest man on the earth in his day. And so he was a guy that could actually experiment and do whatever he wanted, indulge himself in any way that he wanted. There was nothing that he basically couldn't do. And so we're going to look at another man later in this message who was on the opposite end of that spectrum. He had nothing. His life was hanging in the balance. But let's first look at someone that had it all. And let's listen to his words as we recognize this pursuit for satisfaction is something ingrained in us. Every human that's ever walked the planet is relentlessly pursuing satisfaction on some level. The book of Ecclesiastes, written by King Solomon, he starts out in Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verse 2. He says, futile, laments the teacher. Absolutely futile. Everything is futile. What benefit do people get from all the effort which they expend on earth? All this monotony is tiresome. No one can bear to describe it. The eye is never satisfied with the seeing, nor is the ear ever content with the hearing. I thought to myself, come now, I will try self-indulgent pleasure to see if it's worthwhile. But I found that it is also futile. I increased my possessions. I built houses for myself. I planted vineyards for myself. Yet when I reflected on everything that I had accomplished and all the effort that I had expended to accomplish it, I concluded all these achievements and possessions are ultimately profitless. Like chasing the wind, there is nothing gained from them on the earth. So here's a guy that had it all, and he says, it's nothing. It didn't work. It didn't satisfy. Now, when you read the rest of the book of Ecclesiastes, you see the things that that ruined it for Solomon is he says, I look on earth and I see oppression. I see some people that their whole stinking life is hard. I see other people, they're born into wealth and everything is easy even though they're evil. He says, I see people that work all their life long and then instantly lose it all. Life seems to be arbitrary. I see terrible, horrific things happen to good people. I see wonderful things happen to horrible people. And then the ultimate one that Solomon couldn't deal with, he says, the bottom line is, and he keeps repeating this in the book of Ecclesiastes, we all die. We all die. Even if you have it all, you never have enough time. And in this world of ours, you never have enough peace to enjoy it all. And Solomon says, this is lousy. Because God has wired into us a yearning for things that last, a yearning for eternity. That you work at something, you acquire something, and it lasts. It's never taken away. And so there's this problem, this struggle within us that we have these drives to be satisfied on so many levels. And yet the realization that in this temporal world that we live in, that we're born into, if nothing else, death spoils the ultimate satisfaction that we really do want. And so what we do is we squelch it. We deny it. We convince ourselves, hey man, get your bucket list. That's the best thing you can do. Check them off, check them off. That's, you only go around once in life. As though that's enough. It's not enough. You were made, I was made for so much more. And the tension is meant to lead us back to our Creator and to His kingdom, the only person and the only place that these deepest desires can be fulfilled. Back in 1943, there was a man psychologist named Abraham Maslow, and some of you are probably very familiar with this. It's called Maslow's Hierarchy. But he did something helpful to give us an understanding of ourselves as being desire-driven creatures. His theory was that human beings are motivated all their life long to fulfill certain desires, and that once you get the lowest level desires met, then we become motivated to get the desires on the next level. Look at the chart and you'll see what it looks like. You see at the very bottom of the pyramid, physiological needs, breathing, food, water, shelter, clothing, sleep. Once we have those, in other words, imagine if you were starving to death, you wouldn't be too concerned about personal fulfillment or meaning. All you're thinking about is bread. Or if you need water to survive one more day, all you're thinking about is water. But once that need is met, then you start thinking about other things: health, employment, property, family, social stability. That's the second level of needs. If you get all those reasonably met, we start thinking about the third level: love and belonging, friendships, family, intimacy, sense of connection. If we get those three levels of needs met, then we start to aspire toward the others: confidence, achievement, respect of others, the need to be a unique individual. And then ultimately his theory went, if you get those needs met, some, he theorized, not many, get to self-actualization, where morality and creativity and spontaneity, acceptance, experience, purpose, meaning, and inner potential start to become important to you. Now, this was Maslow's theory. It's frankly not true. Because the truth is, a person can be struggling with the first level, struggling to acquire basic survival needs, and they are still concerned about all these others as well. Nevertheless, it is a helpful diagram so that you and I can understand ourselves and what drives us through life, what motivates us. And there is a tendency in what Maslow has here for our progress. We tend to move along through life this way. Now, Solomon, we started out, he was a guy, he would have been at the top of the pyramid. The fact that he was experimenting philosophically to figure out what meant anything in life showed that he had the time and the luxury, the resources, the opportunity, and so forth. But multitudes of people that have ever lived on this earth never get that luxury. Folks, we're here today. There's about 7 billion people on the planet now. This is a really unusual thing because it took all of human history up until about 1800 before the first billion group of people at one time showed up on the earth. In all of human history, they estimate there's been about 108 billion people that have lived and died on earth. But for most of them, their lifestyle would have been so foreign to ours that we would think, oh my goodness, what a horrific way to live. Listen, let me put it in perspective. Up until 1923, Electricity was not prominent. That's pretty much it. So everyone that lived prior to then, think of life without technology. Think of life without electricity. It's pretty much a gruesome type of way to live. You're just struggling to survive. Out of that 108 billion people, probably 90 or even a higher percentage, that's the way they lived every day of their life. And so, ideas about self-actualization probably weren't as important to them as just surviving one more day. There were no safety nets. So we live at a time, kind of like a Solomonic time, where we have this luxury and opportunity. We think it's normal. We're born into it, like our character in the monologue. All I want is just a middle-class income, the American dream. That's all I want. And we feel that's legitimate. That's like being modest. But it's not modest if we know anything about history. It's not modest at all. The greatest kings and the greatest queens and the wealthiest people that have ever lived would have died to have a TV set, climate control, set of wheels, even your junker wheels. They would have died to have them. Better than that chariot, better than that horse and buggy. So we live in this confusing time where we do have the opportunity to pursue self-actualization and gratification of our desires on so many levels. So what do we do with this tension, this ache for satisfaction? Some things we can get and acquire, some we can't. Some we're still struggling to. Well, let's look at the other end of the spectrum. We looked at a man, Solomon, who had it all and who still said, it's not enough. It's just not enough. Let's look at a man who had pretty much, the way we would see it, nothing. He's a first century guy, which means no electricity, no technology. Every day is a hard day. You get enough food for one day, that's a pretty good day. And this man has been a servant of Jesus Christ for 27 years. In other words, he totally dedicated his life to serving Christ. He spent his life going around from place to place, city to city, telling people the truth about God and about Christ. And the result of which he often was in tremendous physical hardship, beaten, and when we're going to look at him now, he's in prison. After 27 years of being loyal to Jesus, he's in prison in Rome, and he doesn't know if he's going to live or die. He has no assurance that because he's a servant of Jesus that he's not going to die. He's very clear about that. No assurance whatsoever. And he's languishing in this Roman jail. But in the jail, he's productive there too. In fact, what he does is he writes 4 books that we now have in our New Testament from this prison experience. The book of Ephesians in our New Testament, the book we're going to look at, Philippians in a minute, the book of Colossians and the book of Philemon. His name is Paul. He's called the apostle, the sent one of God. And when we read his words, he has some things to say. He's looking from the bottom. Solomon was looking from the top. Solomon said it's not enough. Paul is going to say it's more than enough. Was he crazy? Was he a masochist? Or did he have a secret? Let's look at this book that I mentioned, the book of Philippians. It'll be page 1326. Please do turn there so you can read the words with me. Because they're written by a man who's in dire circumstances. He's not on top of the world. We'll be looking at Philippians chapter 4. The book comes from this man, Paul. He planted a little church of followers of Jesus in the city of Philippi, and then years later wrote this letter to that church. And in chapter 4, let's start in at verse 10. Chapter 4, verse 10. So it's page 1326. Keep in mind, the man is in jail. He does not know if he's going to live or die. By the way, about 5 years after this imprisonment, he is arrested again and he is executed. His head is cut off by Nero. At this point, he actually gets out of this imprisonment, but he doesn't know it. Beginning in verse 10, he says, I have great joy. Notice this. The man is in jail, potentially ready for execution. By the way, didn't own a house, didn't have a wife, didn't have a family, didn't have any of the things that we tend to think are necessary for a soul to be satisfied. So he says, I have great joy. Well, where is it, Paul? Where are you getting this joy from? I have great joy in who? In the Lord. Because now at last you have again expressed your concern for me, meaning the Philippians. They were sending him some supplies and things while he was in jail. Now, I know you were concerned before, but had no opportunity to do anything. Now he gets into the key portion starting in verse 11. For I am not saying this because I am in what? Need. For I have learned, notice it's a process, it didn't come instantly. He wasn't born with it, he learned it. I have learned to be what? Content in any circumstance. I have experienced times of the word, need, and times of abundance. In any and every circumstance, I have learned the secret of contentment, whether I go satisfied or, what is the word? Hungry. Have plenty or nothing. Now, the term he used there, I've learned the secret, it's a word used in the New Testament only one time, a Greek word, and it was a word used in the mystery religions of that day, and it meant one that has gone through a secret initiation rite. So Paul is saying that this condition that I've come to, whereby I am content in any and every circumstance, he says it's because I've been initiated into this variety of circumstances that he mentioned. He said, I had seasons where I had abundance, I had plenty, life was good, the sailing was clear, everything was good, people smiled at me. But then I had these times where I had nothing, everything was hard. And he says, because I experienced both of them, the good seasons, the really bad seasons, of course the in-between, he says, because I've been initiated into these things, and in them all I clung to Christ, I stayed true to Him, I was obedient to His word and His will, I learned that in the abundant seasons I could keep my head and not get arrogant and not get selfish, and in the medium seasons I could keep productive, and in the really bad ones, I found a strength that I didn't even know existed because it wasn't mine. In fact, we read Paul saying he came to the very end of himself. And that's when he discovered a new ability of Christ to infuse a little bit more grit into him so that he got through his situation and his day. So it was the result of actually being initiated into these circumstances that he learned the secret of being content in any and every situation. There's a editor of Leadership Journal. It's a magazine that's associated with Christianity Today. His name is Marshall Shelley. And he tells an interesting story where he was alone with his wife's dad, who was a Kansas farmer. And they had this conversation that Shelley says it just sort of turned all the lights on in his head. I'll actually read you the conversation. The farmer, the Kansas City farmer, the dad, starts speaking, and he says to Marshall Shelley, he says, most city folks I know expect each year to be better than the last. They think it's normal to get an annual raise, to earn more this year than you did last year. But as a farmer, I have good years and bad years. It all depends on rain at the right time, dry days for harvest, and no damaging storms. Some years we have more, some years we have less. It was one of those indelible moments of stunning clarity, says Marshall Shelley, and I saw that the law of the harvest, some years being fat and others being lean, applies to much more than agriculture. Shelley goes on, growing in spiritual maturity requires gratefully accepting the seasons of more and the seasons of less that God weaves together in our lives. Paul said, I've learned this secret. He's writing from a jail cell. 27 years of loyal service to Jesus ends him up in jail, waiting to see if he's going to die or live. And he says, I've learned in whatever circumstance I'm in to be content. I've learned the secret. The farmer says, I've learned that life, it has its ups and its downs, and you have to learn to accept them. Marshall Shelley realizes that our Father, who cares more for our character than our comfort, very carefully and constructively weaves things together so that our character may be stimulated and refined and developed. And each of these seasons, the seasons of abundance and the seasons of leanness, they're all the perfect will of the Father, and we can learn to be content in them. It's another quote I'd like to share with you by a lady named Anna Brashares. Should be on the screen. It's pretty simple and powerful. Anna Brashares says, do not spoil what you have by desiring what you finished it for me, have not. It's brilliant and powerful. Do not spoil what you have by desiring what you have not. Anna Brashear, some of you ladies probably recognize her. She writes a lot of material, books for young adults. She had a movie spun off of one of her books called Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants. And some of you dudes now, I've lost you completely. So ladies, close your ears and let me just talk to the men for a minute. Because some of you are thinking, what are you doing, dude? You don't quote the Traveling Pants lady, man. Quote Attila the Hun or young Mike Tyson, but not the Traveling Pants lady. Guys, to get my street creds back with you, I like guns, I like football, and I like pumping iron. Now, ladies, you didn't hear any of that. But guys, just so you know. And I won't quote Anna Brashear's very often. But it's a brilliant insight to life. Now, here's a statement that I put together that I hope will summarize this message for you and kind of put each of us on a path where this ache for satisfaction can be healed, start to heal at least in this life. We'll be able to manage this tension between those things that we cannot have in this life and those things that we can, and finding a constructive balance with these feelings. Here it is. Learn contentment now. That is this life. Learn, it has to be learned, it has to be cultivated, we have to intentionally pursue it. Learn contentment now while these things happen simultaneously, while anticipating complete satisfaction forever. You see, Jesus rose from the grave, which means that every promise that he gave, he has the power to fulfill. He says his kingdom is going to come and his will is going to be done forever. He says there's not going to be any more sickness, sorrow, pain, and death. All the desires of a human being that have any goodness to them whatsoever will be fulfilled and abundantly beyond fulfillment. And they will last forever. Listen to me. The deepest, purest, most wonderful longings of your soul, your desires, will absolutely be satisfied forever. And you won't have to work for them, and you won't have to be afraid of losing them. But it's not now. This is a developmental journey. It is a time where our God is taking us through a set of constructive circumstances that will catalyze just the right tension and stress so that we will develop if we're willing to trust him, if we're willing to cling to him, if we're willing to say, I'm going to learn how to be content when it's really good and I have it all, and I'm going to learn to be just as content when it's really bad and I have nothing. Psalm 145, the psalmist says, speaking from his own experience, he said, the Lord is good to all. He has compassion on all he has made. He says of the Lord, you open your hand and you satisfy the desires of every living thing. Listen, there's no desire that you have in you that is from God that he will not fulfill someday. You can't, I've said this before in messages, one of the plagues of our day is this thought that I'm going to miss out on something. If you are a child of God, if you have put your faith in Christ, if you have returned to God in trust, you cannot miss out on anything. It is yours. It will be preserved in its most perfect form forever. And you have to keep these two things going in your head at the same time. You have to learn contentment now in this imperfect age where every desire and every need is not satisfied, while simultaneously anticipating complete satisfaction forever. So once we recognize that we're driven by this pursuit of satisfaction, we have to then be willing to replace it with the pursuit of a different kind of pursuit of contentment. Now, we are naturally driven to pursue the satisfaction of our desires. We are not naturally driven to pursue contentment. That's a very different thing. That's something like Paul the Apostle said in that jail cell has to be learned experientially. So listen to this verse that we shared earlier in the morning when I was leading you through the time of worship through offering. It's from Hebrews chapter 3, 13, verse 5. And the writer of Hebrews says, your conduct must be free from the love of what? Money. And you must be content with what you have, for he has said, meaning Jesus, I'll never leave you and I will never abandon you. He says, you must be free. Solomon in Ecclesiastes chapter 7, he says, those that love money never have enough of it. We can flip that around. If I feel like I never have enough money, it's indicative that I love it. And to love money is to love something that is not worthy of your love. Now, it's enticing. It's powerful. It can give you self-gratification. It can give you a false sense of security, even a false sense of significance. But it's all that. It's false. It's empty inside. It's a conference some years back in 1997 in Seattle. It was at the American Association for the Advancement of Science. And Bill Gates was the big central speaker there. In 1997, he was the dog even then. And so he gave his big talk, and some 1,500 people hung on every word. And then after him, a doctor, this guy was a medical doctor as well as having a PhD in philosophy, his name was John Cantwell Kiley, stood up to speak. And he surprised everyone by starting with a question. He said this, he said, if Bill Gates were blind, would Bill Gates be willing to part with all of his billions in order to regain his sight? You imagine the wind going out of the room. And Bill Gates spoke up. And without a blink, he said, yes, I would. Now that has a way of putting everything back in perspective. You see, we get our values all skewed, and sometimes we already possess treasure, but we don't know that it's treasure because we have it. And we are so used to it. Here's Bill Gates saying that he would take all of his billions, and he would gladly part with them just to have what you, every one of you, what I have, just to be able to see. And we all know that. We all would say, yes, I think I would too. So we have to get our heads around what matters. What treasure might we already possess that will enable us to learn to be content right now? Could there be some other treasures that we are not consciously thankful for, that we are not valuing them enough? Therefore, no matter how rich we are, we still feel poor. It's kind of like that quote by Anna Brashares. Paul, the apostle, the same guy, writing to his protege Timothy, who was trying to oversee and untangle some messy affairs in a church in Ephesus. And he writes to him in 1 Timothy chapter 6 these words. He says, now godliness combined with, what is the word? Contentment. Godliness. That means a God-centered life, a God-centered perspective as you live. Combined with contentment brings great profit, for we have brought nothing into this world, so we cannot take a single thing out either. But if we have food and shelter, we will be satisfied with that. Think first century context. When they say food and shelter, they didn't have refrigerators. You know, it was pretty much day to day. And here's the Apostle Paul, this one uniquely gifted and sent of God, the same man that we see writing from a Philippian jail or Roman jail cell. And he says to his protege Timothy, he says, look, man, teach the people that life is about godliness. Pursue your relationship with God. Pursue that above everything else in life. And add to that contentment, and you're going to find that's valuable, that's profitable. And he says, look, if you need something to measure more closely, whether you're getting everything you should be getting, if you've got food and shelter, God's taking care of you. Because you didn't bring anything into this world, and you're sure not taking anything out. Balance. Perspective. Let me close with a couple quotes by a man named Alexander Solzhenitsyn. And some of you are familiar with him, Alexander Solzhenitsyn. He lived an extraordinarily long life. He was born in 1918. He lived until 2008. He was 89 years old. He had a rough life. He was a soldier in World War II for Russia. He fought hard, and they finally, of course, with us involved and the Allies, beat back the Germans. And at the end of World War II, when Solzhenitsyn, this soldier who had laid down his life for his country, should have been rewarded, he made the miscue of criticizing the leader of Russia then, Stalin, and the word got back to him, and instead of being rewarded at the end of the war, he was thrown into the gulags, the Russian labor camps, brutal, harsh conditions, 11 years of his life in these conditions. He wrote the book, Gulag Archipelago. He received a 1970 Nobel Prize for literature for writing that book. So he understood, like few of us ever will, what hardship in life is like. Now, Solzhenitsyn was also a Christ follower, and here are his words. The believer, Alexander Solzhenitsyn's reaction to his exile to the Soviet labor camp was to bless it. Let that sink in. 11 years of his life stolen in brutal treatment simply because he didn't agree with the dictator. Because it was there that he discovered, and now this is his quote, the meaning of earthly existence lies not, as we have grown used to thinking, in prospering, but in the development of the soul. What you hear me say in here, and you'll hear me say it as long as I have breath, the purpose of this life is not to get it all now. You can't, you won't, it's impossible. And even if you get it all, you won't live long enough to enjoy it. The purpose of this life is to develop. We are here to develop, first and foremost, a trust relationship with our Creator, and then through that trust relationship to allow Him to help us develop to become the people we were meant to become and to do the things we were meant to do to prepare us for our eternal roles. If you have any other purpose in life, you will be frustrated, confused, and disappointed. And you will be time-bound and fear-driven, I promise you. So Solzhenitsyn says that. Then he goes on, he says, we're too comfortable to be spiritual. So he thinks that comfort is a problem for spiritual development. We think we will be able to pursue God better without danger or hardship. Yet it works in just the opposite way. Nothing is more difficult than to grow spiritually when comfortable. You only have power over people so long as you don't take everything away from them. But when you've robbed a man of everything, he's no longer in your power. He's free again. Paul's in a jail cell, robbed of everything. And he says, I've got joy, and I've learned to be content in any and every situation. You know what that tells me? That tells me that I can have this same thing. As ordinary and as imperfect as I am, as a follower of Christ, I can have this. I can learn this. It tells me that you, if you are a follower of Christ, as imperfect as you are, you, as imperfect like me, we can both learn together how to be content in any and every situation. And the key is that little sentence that I shared with you earlier, if I can get it once more. Learn contentment now. That should be the goal of our life now, while, this has got to be done together, while reminding ourselves, while anticipating complete satisfaction forever, because that's exactly what Jesus promises and nothing less. Now, in closing, I hope that a few things might occur. I hope that for some of you, met a guy in the first service, it was so interesting. As he went out the door, he praised the message and showed me all the notes he had taken, and then he told me, he says, but I'm a Buddhist. But he says, but I'm going to come back again. And I said, that's good, man. That's good. So for some of you, maybe you're a whatever or a nothing. Why don't you consider making an intelligent decision and being reconciled to your Creator by returning this day to Christ, your Creator, in faith, in trust? He says that's the key to your existence. You'll never be fully human and fully alive until you do that. If you return to Him by putting faith in Him and choosing to become His follower today, He promised you, first of all, forgiveness of your sins, the gift of everlasting life in His kingdom, and that ultimately every desire, your deepest desires, will be satiated forever, and in a world where nobody will lack. So if you're here and you're not a follower of Christ, you're not a Christian, why don't you do that today? Nobody can do it for you. It's not a formula. It's a relationship. You either trust Christ and are His follower, or you're not. And then for the rest of us that are already followers of Christ, I hope that you will go out of here today reminding yourself a little bit about these two levels of desires we have, some which can be fulfilled in this life and some cannot, and learn to live with that tension so that we can learn the secret of being content. And I hope that every one of us will leave here determined that you will learn what it is to be content now, simultaneously anticipating deep, true, complete satisfaction forever. We're going to close with a song that I hope that each of us will have resonating in our heart. It's a song we've sang before. It talks about through it all, through it all. I've learned to trust in you through it all, through it all. It is well. It is well with my soul. Father, help us this day to take a step of mature trust in you, to welcome all the seasons of abundance, the seasons of leanness, the seasons that feel good, the seasons that hurt to the core. And know that there's space, there's a secret to be learned in there, that you, Lord Jesus, who will never abandon us, we can find you in all those places. And you are more than enough. It is well with our soul because of you. It's in your name I pray. Amen.